All right. Looks like everybody's coming in. Great. All right. Fantastic. Thank you all for joining us today. Give it just a second for everybody to get logged in. Okay, well, fantastic. We're going to go ahead and get started. Again, good morning. My name is Jason Goodrich. I'm Director of Global Consulting with CriticalArc. We appreciate CUPCA hosting this webinar today to talk about the workplace violence bill or law now in California and the impact that we're going to assess for higher education clients. So again, thank you and appreciate CUPCA and appreciate our panelists today. With me, we've got two retired police chiefs, John Reed and Jack Mormon. So I'm going to let them do a quick introduction as we get going. So John, if you'd like to start, introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. Thanks for the opportunity. And yes, thank you, Kupka, for hosting. See some familiar faces and names, obviously, on the webinar. Just a little bit about myself. 28 years total in higher ed public safety. I almost made the finish line to 40 years in law enforcement in total, but I finally ran out of steam. Spent 14 years as a police chief in the California State University system, specifically at two separate campuses. And currently I'm working as a retired annuitant for the system, and I'm working with the Channel Islands campus, strengthening their policy and procedure program in advance of seeking accreditation through IACLIA, as well as working with the Title IX and Equity Office on strengthening sustainability and program delivery with Clery ASR issues. So, over my career, I had the privilege, the responsibility to lead a number of efforts that intersect and are integrated with what we're talking today. Not only the law enforcement mission, but also environmental health and safety, risk management, emergency planning efforts. My career really has included kind of the genesis, the beginning of things like Clery and the annual security report, as well as the California Campus Safety Act, which certainly has some strong integrations here as well. And then things like BIT, threat assessment, care teams. Those are all items that police advisory groups that I was strongly involved with during my career. So, I know some of you on the call have had the same experiences. My goal is not to be the answer or the know-it-all for everything. My goal is that, like when I was on a webinar, I could take one or two things away that was something that I didn't think about or hadn't thought about. And if that happens today, then I think we've got a win-win. So thanks again.
Outstanding. Thank you, John. Jack, a little introduction there, sir. You're on mute.
I'm Jack Mormon, retired police chief. Started my career, I did 35 years in law enforcement. Started out with 20 years in municipal law enforcement. Worked with the Raleigh Police Department. Was captain with Raleigh PD. Got my master's and my doctorate from North Carolina State University, which was in my district, where I was a district captain with Raleigh PD. But then became chief of NC State University Police Department. Did 15 years there. Was on the IACLIA Board of Directors, retired in 2019 from NC State. Teach as a adjunct professor for Liberty University for the School of Government. Also work with a consultant. We've got some folks we work with in California that we've been, or that Jason and I have been working with to help and kind of get a handle on this SB 553. So that's a little about me.
Excellent. Well, thank you both. Again, thank you, participants, for joining us today. Again, we're going to reserve some time for question and answers. So if you want to type a question there into the Q&A section, we'll be happy to reflect that with our panelists. We've got some prepared questions right now. We're just going to kind of start. Really, I think a foundational piece here. If you, John, if you just want to kind of walk us through some of the basic overview of the new law, kind of what types of violence we're talking about and how it may impact campus operations. Just a quick kind of overview there so we're all on the same page.
Yeah, not a problem. Um, I think what was interesting to me, in regards to this coming out was, actually how much of what is included in SB 553 are things that we are either already doing in higher ed public safety, or you know connected in some way. So the violence log as compared to the daily crime log, in items like that. So um, I think the key elements that, of this particular plan, I think that are important, and you're probably already thinking a lot about or already engaged with, is the workplace violence prevention plan, right? And so there's a number of resources, I think, out there to help assist. I've seen some of the California State Universities, for example, already have plans and web pages, up that are, addressing these issues. So, having the plan in place, and communicating and coordinating that with employees, plans along the lines of effective procedures to respond to reports of workplace violence. How are we ensuring compliance by all employees? How are we, reporting that? How are we assessing that? There's certainly requirements for training and record keeping, um, that are significant, as part of this plan. And then assessment. And we're going to talk a little bit about all of these things in a little more detail in the specific questions. I think, some of the key provisions for me, as I went through it, that maybe weaknesses on some of the campus really were, effective procedures for ensuring employee engagement. So it's one thing to sit down and work through a plan and write it out, but how is a campus really going to engage employees in developing and implementing the plan? So I'm hoping to address that in a little bit more in some of the questions that we have, and then procedures to identify and evaluate the workplace violence hazards. Um, those are issues that may be a weakness on a campus. So we're hoping, to be able to support that as well. And then finally, I think for me, it's where does the public safety department, the police department, the leaders in that organization, how do they take an active role in supporting and ensuring compliance, even if the specific requirements, are to comply with this are put into another office like risk management or environmental health and safety? How does the police chief really serve as a leader in ensuring that compliance is not only compliance, but best or better practices, are being implemented?
Fantastic. Thanks, John. Yeah, I think you make a good point there in that, higher education has kind of been on this journey, right? Since really Virginia Tech was kind of the wake-up call with the threat assessments and doing training and preparing campuses for what essentially is workplace violence as typed under this law. So yeah, we in some ways you've got a little bit leg up over maybe some of the other businesses that this law now applies to. So Jack, I'll switch over to you for just a second. If you could talk us maybe through some of the key provisions that you see are takeaways for our attendees to focus on, maybe walk through some of what they actually do if a workplace violence is prevented. What are some of the requirements that we're looking at through the law?
Okay, yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, I think one of the big things is the communication piece. And again, I know it was already talked about a little bit, but the actual responding to actual and potential emergencies is a key part of it. Developing, we've already talked about the training to some degree, even the classification of the different types of violence is, again, you've got type 1, which is an individual who has no affiliation or connection to the university. Type 2 is more of a customer type relationship. Type 3 is a uh, co-worker, supervisor type relationship. And then type 4 is someone who has a personal relationship. So, to me, making sure you've got those categories correct. I think making sure that you've got the violence log updated. The law is very specific in what must be included in that log. So, it's a lot of, one thing about this is it's a lot of very specific information about how you should do it. I think the model plan that Cal OSHA sent out, I think is very helpful too, because it's basically a fill in the blank plan, if you will, where you can go ahead and just insert your information. I One of the big takeaways for me too is what should be done after the incident happens. So and also the record keeping component of it. Um, but it's definitely a lot involved in it. Not sure if that answered your question or not.
That's fine. John, anything you would add around key provisions or steps that we should be prepared to take in the event of a reported case of workplace violence?
Yeah, I think it really leads into the next question in our series, which really talks about what in this plan, what do we recommend be included in the plan, right? And
Yes.
there's the requirements under the law, very specific about, different procedures and methods, that need to be integrated. I think for this particular audience, to me, the key really is how do we inform and use this to support what we already have in place as far as effective procedures to respond to actual emergencies. And then what Jack touched on at the end of his comments was really post-incident response and investigations. I think those are two areas that public safety, law enforcement, security, and higher education, we in my opinion, should be the strength of what we can bring to this particular plan. I mean, yes, there's all types of items like, the integration of the illness injury prevention program, the integration of BIT teams or threat assessment teams, care teams, however you have them labeled. But a key element that I think we should be driving information into this particular plan is the procedures that we have for response in actual emergencies. And then what some of us might refer to as hot wash, right? I mean, those items with post-incident review and assessment. We should be leading in those areas. And I think plan the requirements under the law here for this particular plan allow us to maybe leverage improvement in those areas that we may have on our particular campus, whether it's equipment needs, physical security needs, the ability to do mass communication, for example. These are all points for us to enter into the conversation. Because here's just another thing, another item that's critical in informing what we do.
Excellent. Gentlemen, one of the key phrases that really stood out to me when reviewing this is the reference about the ongoing review process, right? So again, not something that they're looking that this is a one-time setup and you're good, right? It's not a check the box kind of thing. They expect some type of ongoing continual updated process here. Jack, could you talk a little bit about what that kind of means to you, what you would look for when you see that word ongoing?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think I would make, to me, I think the key of that is documentation, much like we have to do with some of our accreditation standards that requires us to conduct an annual review of certain policies. To me, it's important to have, if not a formal team, at least a informal team, if you will, where you have someone from environmental health and safety, you have your threat assessment or your behavior assessment team manager, you have your representatives of the police department, you have your HR director, and you come together and you look at, okay, these are our incidents. How did we manage them? How does our communication format work? How does our meeting schedule work? How many of those incidents that came to our radar actually resulted in injury or an act of violence? How were we able to mitigate them? How effective were we with using whatever threat assessment tool we use to evaluate them? And then I would take as a result of that, I would say, okay, we need to amend our procedures in such and such way, or we need to add this to our training. And then I would take that memo, make the changes, and attach that to my file. To me, at least having one very thorough review like that on an annual basis, I think is important. And again, what's difficult, I think, about this is there's so many different people or different entities that do have a stake in it. It can't be one, it can't be just the police department or what have you.
Exactly. And John, you touched on this earlier too. Would you follow up a little bit around that synergy that maybe there's the potential to build here, or really accelerate an existing relationship with areas such as EH&S or your threat assessment groups, things like that? How do you see really the leverage there with this ongoing process and working with those other entities that have a foot in the compliance as well?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that's going to be key. I mean, this is a new, in a vacuum, right? This is a new initiative. This is something new. It's a bolt on. People are going to be like, oh, here's something else. To me, it just highlights again the need for, multi-department collaborations as well as multi-campus collaborations. There's just so many folks that have their hands in this. I mean, when you look at, not just the police department, but when you look at, the EH&S, HR, faculty affairs, Title IX, and equity, the student affairs teams, with care and conduct, and all the elements that are a piece of that, right? To the Title IX regulations and reporting, the illness injury prevention program, Clery, ASR, the things that are happening in the Campus Safety Act, or the Campus Safety Plan, the California Campus Safety Plan, all of those items. And again, this is where I think, the police department can lead, right? To begin to pull these items together. One of the things we'll talk a little bit about is, the daily crime log versus this violence incident log, right? And I mean, how do those come together, or do they even come together? And maybe there's not, one answer fits everybody for that. But I think, my concern is that, there could be campuses that, are not thinking about, hey, how do I synergize all of this, to use a buzzword? What are these multi-departmental integrations that can happen? And I think that gives us an opportunity to lead, and helps us to highlight again, we're not just law enforcement, right? We don't have this singular mission. It's much more of an enterprise approach, in regards to public safety. And then, Jack brought up a good point, in regards to the review process and, how we can support, record keeping and documentation for this. But I think, another key element to this review process is really how we engage the employees and work groups. And in California, we know that means unions. We know that means potentially meet and confer. We know that means compliance with collective bargaining agreements. And so I think, that's going to be a key element when we talk about review process, is how we keep, the unions that, are representing individuals on your campus engaged in the process with identifying hazards, working to mitigate that. And in my experience, I mean, all of those relationships happened in person. It was meeting with representatives of, in the CSU's sphere, with California Faculty Association, CSU EU, SUPA, APEC, all these different groups that, connecting, making those personal relationships and involving them in the initiation and the review. I would strongly advise that, that not be overlooked or excluded, because I know it's difficult at times, but I think it's it's super necessary.
That's an excellent point. So we all understand that there's the training provision, right? We expect probably some level of basic training to be done upon initial employment, likely through an HR orientation type process. It makes sense. But I'm interested in, is there anything kind of beyond that you would see as an opportunity perhaps to do in the training realm? Is there expanded chance for maybe the police departments to play a bigger role here and provide some additional training or some exposure for the police around what they can offer from training? Or is there opportunities with these other groups, EHS, we've mentioned, threat assessment, CARES, to really kind of step up the collaboration and co-training with maybe the police department? Any ideas or thoughts on kind of enhancing the training, maybe?
Yeah, I can step in there as a start. To me, it really opens up the opportunity, I think, for a campus or a system to really look at a training suite that, to me, I would be looking to bolt this on to the illness, injury, and prevention program, probably as a start, and connected in with what would have been my EH&S team when I was the chief of police, and say, let's bolt this on to that as a start, because there was a July 1st deadline. Things had to move. Let's get our plan up. Let's hit our check boxes, and then expand from there. Better best practices from there. But I think from a training aspect, right, to me, I would be trying to drive how do we integrate not only the illness, injury prevention program, but any other training that's happening in this sphere throughout the campus. So we have campus security authority training going on, right? And that there's a significant intersection there. There's the Title IX training, sexual misconduct that's happening. There's a strong connection there. There's the DHR, discrimination, harassment, and retaliation training that's happening as well. And what I would be trying to drive is a suite that begins to encompass all of that in one spot under one authority. And I know that that's potentially a heavy lift, but I see it still being connected, to the campus and still being on the payroll and still getting these mandatory trainings that, come through my inbox. All of a sudden there's 5 or 6 or 7 different types of trainings that are coming through. And, it really begins to get difficult not only to accomplish those, but to appropriately process those and make them effective. And so I think, again, that's a spot where where public safety can lean into that and begin to drive discussions about, piecing and putting all of that together.
Excellent. Jack, anything you would add on the training aspects?
So, certainly I think that was a very thorough answer to it. The one thing I will say, I could see it really being taxing on some of the larger institutions, and particularly your land grant institutions. Having spent most of my career as a land grant institution, at NC State, we had over 9,000 employees. If I'm not mistaken, I think UC Berkeley has around between 12 and 13,000 employees. So when you're talking about making sure that all of those individuals, all your employees, whether it's your extension agents, if they work for your land grant institution, your 4-H coordinators, if they're like they were for me, that's a lot of folks across the state. And it's very specific training and training that needs to be geared to the specific threats and challenges of violence based on their specific job. So, I think that's going to be, as John said, that's going to be a very heavy lift to get that up and running and to get that accounted for, particularly with the initial training. I would say for the annual training afterwards, to me, using your LMS system or whatever your institution uses, much, as you would sign off on your requirements for your sexual assault or sexual harassment procedures or what have you, conduct that training virtually, if you will, through that LMS would be what you would need to do for subsequent years. And I'm not sure if I'm wrong about those statistics or not, or the number of employees, but like I say, it's going to be huge for some institutions.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, and Jason, just to kind of jump off of that as well. I mean, yeah, when I put my director or chief hat back on and I think about this, I'm just like, wow, what a lift. But then it reminds me of so many things in the past, right? And what a hard lift some of this is. And I know oftentimes I would get stuck, with the volume and the scale and scope of all of this, right? And oftentimes I would have to tell myself, just break it down, one bite of the elephant at a time, right? I mean, use these templates, use your partners to get a plan in place, right? I mean, get some basic training up, as Jack says, in your learning management system, right? And I know in the CSU system, they developed a system-wide training, right? And it covers 23 campuses at 23 different locations, 23 different types of campuses, massive organizations, and then very small, almost private-like organizations. And there's not a lot of campus-specific information in there, right? But it's a step forward. Campuses are getting their plans up. They've got this training, right? And it's oftentimes, I would struggle with, wow, I'm not going to be 100% on this, and then I don't get anything started, right? And it's kind of like, no, what, I'm going to at least get 50% started here and get myself moving, and then work is work, and begin a process to slowly improve this. Continuous improvement, right? I think is just so critical. So my advice would be, don't let the enormity of it stop progress from happening, with we can't do that, we can't do that, we can't do that. I mean, it's like, yeah, you're right, you can't, but you can do this. Get on this, right? And make sure something's in your learning management system, get a checkbox checked off, and then just, keep taking those small bites forward, I think is critical.
I think that's good advice, John. Let's shift a little bit towards the compliance side here, right? So I know, John, you mentioned earlier in your opening statement about the segues with other compliance laws that exist, right? So obviously higher education, hugely impacted under clearance regulation. So how would you go about this with the specific requirements for a workplace violence log? Does it tie into existing systems? Is it something separate from those existing systems, such as the daily crime log and other reporting requirements that may exist? Jack, would you want to start us out on that, maybe?
Right. And I would say in my recommendation would be that it would be a separate log. And I think the reason behind that is because, as we know, our daily crime log is very specific in those categories: date, time occurred, date, time reported, disposition of the incidents, whereas the violence log has a completely different criteria of what must be maintained in it. So, I don't think I wouldn't recommend having them as a combined log like we do with the crime log and fire log, for example. But I think having them live in the same place. So maybe you click this link and it takes you to both your daily crime log and your violence log, which is a separate format, would be my recommendation.
John, anything you would add around specifically California requirements?
Yeah, I think I really struggled with this one. Just really because I went back to the root, right? So it's like if there's violence on campus, if there's danger on campus, if there's trouble on campus, like who do you report that to? Right. And we would all tell people, you report that first and foremost to your public safety unit, right? Sure, there's other offices that you can report crimes to, whether it's student conduct or your ombuds or whatever, that might be part of your campus policies in regards to Clery. But at the end of the day, we want people to report these things to the public safety unit, right? And so if they do, right, we are already maintaining this daily crime log. And I thought back to the process that we used for that, right? So our daily crime log got produced, automagically out of our report management system. So we used Sunridge Systems for our CAD RMS program. And so, it was coded to be able to, automatically produce, the daily crime log, right? With how inputs were in there, both in CAD, but primarily RMS. And so, okay, as Jack says, at least initially, I should be responsible as the police department to, do this violence log in my mind, because I've got that information. So I'm going to take that on. It's not initially going to fit into the protocol I have for the daily crime log because, maybe this stuff doesn't even get entered into RMS. Uh, as Jack said, it's a little more comprehensive than what the daily crime log requires. So there's some issues with that, but I know I don't have the answer to that, but I know I would be thinking about, as a department head, I'd be thinking about how do I get these things together in some form or fashion, because I don't want to add on another thing to folks to be doing, right? And I don't know if I necessarily want the daily crime log happening in one office, and then the violence log, I'll just call it that, for happening somewhere else. And so that was that one was a struggle for me. How that would kind of play out.
Right, definitely a challenge there, and assuming you're going to see some level of duplication, right? Because theoretically, you're going to see things that will be on the daily crime log that could also be required to be on that violence log as well. So
Right.
again, yeah, so definitely some logistics to kind of sort through there.
Yeah, and I that might be something that down the road I would be thinking about. How does Sunridge Systems with my CAD RMS potentially support that? Add some data fields. Um, because right now they are adding things to the daily crime log that don't get reported, um, directly to the police department. So individuals are reporting a Clery crime, for example, to another office, And then through a workflow, that information is coming to UPD, and UPD is entering that basic information into CAD RMS as a report, thereby populating the daily crime log, right? And so that workflow could happen, but electronically, we'd have to have some additional support from Sunridge Systems to create, the data fields for that. So, and that would be a work in progress. So it certainly wouldn't happen tomorrow.
Excellent points.
And
Yeah, Jack?
and Jason, I'll say too, I think what makes this even more difficult is the fact that you're not going to necessarily be able to extract that data in the same format you would for your daily crime log, because it does say you must include specific information like specific what type of attack or injuries were there, what were the consequences of the incident, what steps were taken to protect the employees from further threats or violence, who completed the log, but yet at the same time, so I mean, you're getting in a lot more detailed narrative information, if you will, but yet you also have to balance that with excluding any personal identifying information that would reveal who that individual was that was the victim. So I think that's going to I would feel like you would have to manually really manage that information.
Well, log is a bit of a misnomer too, right? Because with what we go to think about crime log, it's really a report that with the data report, basically.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's so true.
So shifting gears a little bit, again, in the law enforcement side of the house, we're always looking to promote ways to talk about, get us information about potential threats, see something, say something, all those kind of ideas and campaigns that go about. We know communication is a key piece of this legislation that's required. Thinking about the different strategies, and again, going back to the ongoing assessment processes, I think tying communication to that, there's some advantages, and really trying to build that culture of these are the mechanisms that you can activate to report things. And hopefully we can get it on the front end before it becomes a violent event that has occurred, right? So if you would, maybe John, if you could talk through some ideas you have around how can you make this a communication effort, not just necessarily of the campus police, but maybe a wider net, or the ability to encourage that kind of cultural adoption of violence prevention and the ideas behind the see something, say something kind of campaigns.
Yeah, sure. I think you're right. I mean, super critical to what's happening here, and I think public safety leading into this as well, should really be examining what are my communication channels with all of these other department stakeholders already, right? Are they good? Do I have a appropriate workflow in place? So, to me, long term, best practice, right? This begins to find a home on campus. My thought process is that ultimately all of this falls under an enterprise approach to risk management, and that's something I would be advocating for. Not only this, but certainly, even the illness injury prevention program, all of the things around Title IX, DHR, the campus, safety plan, all the threat assessment bit stuff. I mean, I think all of that, strongly falls institutionally under an enterprise approach to risk management. I know everybody wouldn't agree with that. But that's one of the things I think I would be trying to drive. But that's a heavy lift. That's a massive effort. What do I do in the meantime? Taking that small bite, and I think it is really evaluating where I'm at with my bit care teams, my threat assessment teams, my risk management work groups, my police advisory council, EH&S works, the Clery compliance team. Do you have a Title IX equity work group? Some sort of DHR advisory panel, disability resource programs, and what communication methods do I have, with those individuals? I mean, do I have a Slack channel, a Teams group that's, set up for that? That's following, communication, it's following ideas, it's following thought process, it's following ideas. That would be the first thing I would be evaluating. Just as a simple measure, I would say, what, for this workplace violence prevention plan, I'm going to set up a specific Teams group for that. I'm going to include all of these stakeholders in that, and I'm going to begin to lead communication in that effort, and drive collaboration through that separate from some of the other things that are doing. So at least I have a physical marker for integration and multi-department collaboration. I mean, at least I have that physical marker. And I know that's one more thing. And I know it's, some, myself included, struggle a little bit with, whether it's Slack or Teams or, those type of communication channels. But again, to me, it's important to put the foot down and say, okay, I at least have a marker here for that communication.
Sure. Jack, anything you would share on your thoughts around communication?
So I'll say, certainly, anytime you would have a timely warning that you would issue, it would probably also not only be a timely warning under Clery, but you're basically saying it's an ongoing threat to the safety of campus for you to issue that timely warning. So I think you need to make sure that you're looking at that incident, as we alluded to earlier, not only from a Clery perspective, but also from the SB 553 perspective. And what else does that trigger? And I think ongoing communication is critical there. And that's why I think having some, for example, the Safe Zone app that CriticalArc has, or having some way that you can identify those individuals who may be at risk, and whether it's through geofence, through their location, what have you, and keep that communication ongoing, not just for your mass comms, but also the ability to do targeted communication with those individuals. Make sure you're keeping them updated as the situation changes and develops. I also think for communication, this is the true value of the threat assessment or your behavior assessment team, because again, we know they're based on breaking down silos and keeping that internal communication going. And last thing I'll say, Jason, and this is something that I know you're very familiar with because you and I have done them together before, but I think that's the development of a security master plan. And what we see in a lot of institutions is based on the structure. You may have a police department policy on sending timely warnings. It may be a university policy, but a lot of what you're doing with the communication, the training, the violence prevention is your internal policies. Having a security master plan at the institutional level that clearly defines who's responsible for what the safety standards are, what the expectations are across the board when you're responding to this type incident, who's responsible for what, I think makes a huge difference, because so many of, again, as we talked about, there are a lot of stakeholders, so many safety and security measures and initiatives develop organically, that it helps to have that institutional policy that says, okay, the police department is responsible for this. These are the expectations. These are the standards. EH&S is responsible for this, and kind of tying that all together.
Outstanding. Yeah, I want to try and leave a fair amount of time for some Q&A. So I've got one last question that I'd like to have you guys weigh in on. Again, and I like the mention of the campus security master plan. I am a firm advocate in those. I think it helps set that roadmap for the institution. It helps give you that firewall when they want to start cutting things out of new building construction, things like that, right? So we see in the model policy from Cal OSHA here that there are a lot of physical security concepts or things that they want you to consider, right? So there's almost a requirement here for that physical security assessment in the violence prevention area of campus. So always looking to be able, where can I leverage additional resources or add things to the portfolio that I need? Do you see an area here where we could tie this in to maybe the master planning process, the physical security assessments, to look at, I need to improve X, Y, or Z. Maybe it's access control, maybe it's lighting, whatever the case may be, and kind of springboard or leverage this new requirement as part of that process. John, anything you want to talk about there around this concept of physical security assessment and how it ties in with the law?
Yeah, I mean, I think you said it. You said it perfectly, right? I mean, this is a springboard. It's an open door, I think, to a resource ask for these types of assessments. And one of the things that I learned in my time is that either myself or somebody on my team, had the ability to do this work, some of this work, right? When you talk about physical security assessments, you talk about the security master plan, certainly, but it was always an issue of capacity for us. I mean, we're working day to day, on those issues that come in, and I know the folks on our call, are in those same situations. So, when you're looking at workplace violence prevention, and if you're not assessing, access control, alarms and panic buttons, door locks, violence windows, physical barriers, restraint systems, cameras, lighting, I mean, just go on and on. Okay, just from a physical standpoint, then I think you're not working toward a better or best program. And so, to me, this is just another thing that's added, which, potentially can tip the cart towards, hey, we need to make an ask, for physical security assessments, for security master plans, and we need somebody to come in and help us, to be able to piece all of that together, because it's critically important. We can support that. We don't have necessarily the capacity to do all of that, but we need to put these in place. And, here's the proof for that. I mean, I think this document itself, this law, really supports that. So that would certainly, if I was still sitting there as a director or chief of police, that'd certainly be something I would be pushing strongly into, to try and leverage to the campus's benefit. It only helps to support our mission.
Excellent. Jack, anything you would just add quickly to tie up on that?
Yeah, just two quick points. One thing I'd like to follow up on what John said, not only whether or not you have the resources to do it, but I think sometimes it helps for a fresh set of eyes. Jason, whether it's you or some other consultant coming in, you're looking at things from a different perspective. And also sometimes that's given more. Every police chief I know wants more cameras. They want access control on every building. So if you're internally generating that report, it's like, yeah, of course, what you're going to say that. But if somebody from the outside comes in and does a security assessment, creates a security master plan, you're like, okay, these are the industry standards, these are the best practices, this is what we recommend specifically for your institution, then I hate to say it this way, but it may give some more credibility, if you will. And I think the other thing is this really drives the stakes up. So again, everything that every police chief has wanted for years, but it's been cost prohibitive. Now, if you're looking at it, okay, Now with this legislation, uh, if someone can come back and say, hey, I was a victim of violence because you didn't have sufficient cameras, you didn't have sufficient lighting. Now it's spelled out more what your responsibility and obligations or to the standard of care, if you will, are.
Mhm.
And I think it's going to open institutions up to more liability, certainly if they don't, if they aren't doing the right thing.
Mhm. Yeah,
Good point. Yeah. All right, we do have a couple questions that have been shared. If anyone else has any additional questions, please feel free to add them to the Q&A section there. Catherine, we appreciate your participation today. She's got a couple of questions around training. So we'll just add, I think we touched on this a little bit, but John, maybe you can speak to including volunteers as part of the workplace violence prevention training. Is that required? What about outside employees that may work full-time on campus? So I'm thinking like contractors, construction workers, perhaps things like that. Any thoughts on those entities and the applicability on their entities?
Yeah, so I think there's two parts to that question. The first one I have a solid answer to. So the second one, even I'm a little fuzzy on right now, and that would be the contracted employees. There is a provision that talks about other employers on campus. But in my research leading up to this, I don't know if I have a solid answer on that yet, and I think that's something we would have to get back unless Jack or you have a source that's got that dialed in. But I think it's important to know that in this with this particular legislation, volunteers, student employees are not excluded. It would be my interpretation, are not excluded from this. Pay status has nothing to do with that. So any employee, student worker, or volunteer. Well, a volunteer wouldn't be an employee, but a volunteer as well would you would have to. So if you had an event, for example, you had volunteers that were coming in regularly for that. Those are folks that would have to be included, within this program.
Perhaps ushers for athletic events or concerts, things
Correct.
like that.
Correct.
Jack, anything on your side? Any thoughts on contractors, outside employees, perhaps?
I agree exactly with what John said. That's my perspective on it. Again, if you're large, have a football game, you're using off-duty police officers who are working for you, uh, contract security, what have you. And to me, although as John mentioned, it's not quite clear on contracted employee, but I think you would err on the side of caution and say, okay, nobody's going to say you shouldn't have trained these people, whereas they might say you should have. But I think the student workers is the big piece of it. And I think that's, again, very clear to me that they would be included.
Excellent. All right, thank you both for that. Another question from Catherine is around training about doing the online training programs, right? So we talked a little bit about the learning management systems, and this would be good enough to meet the Cal OSHA requirement. I think we believe that yes, the online capabilities would in fact meet that training requirement. Her second piece to that is how do you make it more interactive? What can you do within that LMS to make it more engaging, I guess, for that employee? Jack, would you like to touch on that to start?
Yeah, sure. So I think one thing you would do is you would have some scenarios in it. You would have some, not just training on, these are the requirements, but give some scenarios. How would you handle this? Have it designed in such a way that there are some open text boxes. It's not just yes, no, check, if you will. The other thing I think about training is because it's very specific about what needs to be trained on. As we talked about earlier, even training on how you can participate in the development and implementation of the plan, the job-specific hazards, how to report incidents, which to me is one of the key ones of how you make that initial report, if you will. Where the violence prevention log is, how you can view it, what information is contained in it. It's a lot that has to be packed into this training. But again, I think some scenarios would be beneficial. And if possible, like I say, I think the initial training would hopefully be in person, if feasible.
Sure. John, thoughts?
Yeah, the piece on the training that I think folks should pay attention to is, there is a requirement that, you offer opportunities, for interactive discussions with someone who's knowledgeable about the plan. And so when I think about training, right, I think about, well, there's 10 bullet points, give or take, right? There's 10 bullet points for this training. That doesn't all need to happen in one training. Okay. You don't have to have the super training program, right? And, I thought about, how would I accomplish that? Because, the CSU, for example, they pushed out a system-wide training on this, and it's cookie cutter. I don't want to demean it at all. I mean, I think, we're hitting a checkbox to start, as I mentioned earlier, which is great. So it's out there, but I know that, I have to provide, opportunities for interactive interaction. So, my thought on that is, I'm going to add something onto this that really says, hey, if you want to dive deeper in this, if you have questions, if you have concerns, you can contact me, or you can contact so and so, in regards to that, just add that statement onto the training. Okay, so that I could say, hey, our training, uses this modality. It is online. It's not happening in real time, but we have this provision in place that says, hey, if you need to have a discussion, if you want to have a discussion, right, here's how you can do that. Again, until, if ever, right, we're building out a better practice where, as Jack says, there's some sort of hybrid kind of program, and you can piece all of this together. So that's a part I wouldn't miss. Okay, I got the online training, but then someone's critical, rightfully so, because you're not offering an opportunity, or some sort of avenue for interactivity. So that would be my comment.
Excellent. Not seeing any additional questions, and I know we're coming right up on time today, so I'm going to go ahead and say thank you to both of you for your insights and the work that you put into both for your current clients and sharing with our folks today. Again, we appreciate all our attendees and hope that it's been informative for you. Again, my name is Jason Goodrich. If you have questions or you would like additional information around this and how we can help, please reach out at jason@criticalarc.com. That's jason@criticalarc.com. We'd be happy to get back with you. Again, thank you for your time today, and we appreciate all of you, and stay safe. Thank you.